held accountable to when a parent isn't involved in her child's homework or whatever is happening. A teacher shouldn't be held accountable when there's abuse going on in the home, or when there's low economic status and you just don't have the same level of parental commitment. And the problem with putting all these accountability measures in place is we're shifting accountability away, and you're putting a crux between the teacher and the student, because all of a sudden that little child becomes a problem to the teacher's pay. And that is not okay. Kind of statistic.
Sure.
So I appreciate your concern for teachers and not holding them hostage to test scores. And there's an important piece to that puzzle that I'm not sure that everyone is aware of. The model that Utah has put together for teacher evaluation is comprised of 3 pieces. So one of those components is the supervisor's evaluation. A second component is stakeholder input that comes from surveys from parents and students. And with those, it's not really the data that comes back, it's what do you do with that data? How do I act on it to become a better teacher, okay? The third piece is student growth. Now, for teachers of tested subjects and grades, so you're looking at grades 3 through 6 in the elementary school, and those teachers who teach math, language arts, and science at the secondary level, their SGP can be used. So that's the student growth percentile that comes from the SAGE testing, right? You get the proficiency score and you get the student growth percentile. Their student growth percentile can be used to document student growth in that 3-pronged model for teacher evaluation. Okay, but there is another choice. The teachers can also use something called a student learning objective, SLOs. And that student learning objective is directed at the classroom level, and there's a lot of flexibility there with what kinds of measures can be used to help the teacher show growth in it provides other lines of evidence beyond just that one-shot test. Because I think we're all in agreement that how a student performs one day on one given assessment doesn't tell me a lot about that child's capability. And we know that. But this does give teachers another line of evidence to show administrators, who ultimately then will give the evaluation as to, how effective the teacher is. They have that other piece. So they're really not being held hostage by test scores. I feel your pain for that. Being a math teacher for that many years, that's a scary thing to say, well, I've got these end-of-level tests that are going to affect potentially my pay. Well, there is that other option. I just want you to be aware.
Dave?
Yeah, let me talk a little bit about testing.
And by the way, just let's all hold our applause until the end, if that's okay. I think it just kind of takes some time, and let's just save it till the end. Thank you. Sorry, Sharon, I didn't mean to steal your thunder.
Yeah, we like you.
They were applauding, so but let's save it we're going to save it till the end.
I want to talk a little bit about testing, because the state board has done something different with testing that started back in 2007 that plays into how teachers teach. We began pilot programs in 2007 with computer adaptive testing. In those pilot programs, one of them was in the Sevier School District. Computer adaptive testing is a process by which you're given a task. If you get the test question right, you get a harder question. If you get it wrong, you get an easier question. What we did through computer adaptive testing is we give what are called formative tests. So they're not the end of school level high stakes tests. They're intermediate tests along the way. And through those computer adaptive tests that are online, the teachers are able to get immediate feedback and see where their students are, and individually where students are, with their strengths and weaknesses in a variety of areas, whether it's arithmetic or whether it's with quadratic equations, whatever it is, they get to see how they're scoring so that they're able throughout the school year to adapt and change the way they're teaching to focus on those areas where their students don't have the greatest strengths. So I guess I don't want to get the impression that all testing is bad, because testing has been effectively used in order to enhance the teaching model and to help students move forward. And if you ask the parents in the severe school districts and the teachers in the severe school districts, after they went through that 3-year pilot program, there was vast improvement. And you couldn't find a parent or a teacher that did not have praise for that strategy of how that worked out with computer adaptive testing. Now, when we talk about SAGE, SAGE is computer adaptive testing. And there are formative tests that can be given by teachers. And then there's the end of level test. It's a high stakes test that's required by No Child Left Behind. And so I don't want to give the good parts of the testing interfering with the end of level testing, which yet is problematic, but it's mandated by No Child Left Behind.
So here's a question on testing, and specifically on SAGE. It says, as parents, it appears that SAGE is an adaptive test. How can we determine what kids are learning when each child takes a different test?
And maybe Sherry can probably tell you more.
So the way that the grading works on it is there is a baseline standard that basically is the level to which students must be able to perform at a particular grade level. And then it adapts up and down. We need to understand too, this first year it was only pseudo-adaptive. It wasn't fully adaptive. It will be next year, and also we'll have the option to have students start at their capacity. But the model is kind of a difficult mathematical model behind it, but it does have a baseline level that students must meet at that grade level in order to demonstrate proficiency. Even though every student's being given a different test. By the way, there is one other piece that I think we need to know about from the SAGE testing. It is the first time ever, as far as I'm aware, that we've actually had 3 different components to testing. So it's kind of an amazing system. We have the formative that Dave indicated that lets teachers know how students are progressing as they move throughout instruction. It lets me adapt my instruction to meet the needs of my learners, which is phenomenal. We also have interim tests, which are given twice a year, once in the fall and then once in January-ish, February. And those are directly to predict success on the summative. So they give teachers another indication of how instruction could change in order to help make sure that students are meeting the standards and are learning what needs to be there in that course. And then of course there's the summative in addition to that. Utah has never had a complete system that helps students achieve and be successful by the end of each grade level. So that's kind of a nice accomplishment.
I think you need to begin with an understanding that testing and assessment are not one and the same thing. Testing is a small piece of assessment. And I don't want to give the impression that assessment is bad. Think about any skill that you have learned. Part of your learning process was getting feedback. And that feedback really came as a result of someone assessing your performance, someone assessing your level of skill, your level of understanding. And what I'm opposed to is a testing and accountability model that's based on a high-stakes test that really is a sort of post-mortem test, because by the time results come back, students are long gone. And so it doesn't give a teacher an opportunity to adjust instruction for that child. Now, the kinds of tests that Dave and Sherry are talking about are a tremendous step forward for a teacher to be able to receive what I'll call informative data. Informative because it informs my instruction as a teacher for tomorrow, for that student. Tim, in terms of the question, I think it's an excellent question. You know, how can you have students taking basically different tests and that be fair? What you're really after is not comparative data necessarily. You're trying to hone in on that student's individual performance. You know, to me there's a level of unfairness having everybody take the same test, and yet there's a child, let's say, that might have a learning disability or doesn't speak English as a primary language or has any other kind of obstacle. Think of the ethics of forcing that child to take item after item after item that is just outside of his or her reach. And so the computer adaptive test that David's talked about makes that adjustment, because what we're really after with assessment of students is not comparative data, but rather information that can help us understand where that child is today and use that information to adjust instruction for tomorrow to make a difference in that child's education.
If I understand correctly, you guys are the experts, but I can speak layman's terms. The reason that you can compare or kind of measure whether they've met the benchmark is because each of the items has a certain ranking, and once they get to a certain level on the test, then they're considered proficient. Is that correct? So, you know, you have 10 different levels of questions, and you start on level 5, you get on 4 and 3, and then 4 and 3, and you determine, okay, you're below proficiency. And is that right? Like item response theory or something like that?
Well, and maybe I could just say that again, I come back to a statement that I made earlier that you know, the testing and accountability model has focused on proficiency. That ought to be the foundation, you know, and yet we're using it almost like it's become the ceiling. So again, even with this computer adaptive testing, the goal isn't to determine proficiency, it's just to determine where are they, so that we can take them from step 1 to step 2 or step 28 to step 29, wherever they are. And so for me, computer adaptive tests make sense because we're trying to individualize for students and figure out where they are today so we can make adjustments in instruction and take them to another level tomorrow. But if we stay focused on proficiency only, are you proficient or not proficient, you know, I think we've kind of missed the boat in terms of the power of some of these new forms of assessment.
Okay, Lisa, and then we're gonna shift off of testing for
Well, I just wanted to make a couple of points. So Sherry mentioned that all this data is coming back to the teachers so that they can share it with their administrators who can determine what is a highly effective teacher. And so I just think that there is some concern there because one of our biggest concerns is shifting accountability away from parents. And when you're always constantly worrying about who determines what is a highly effective teacher. Because if I go around my neighborhood, the parents in the neighborhood, just from one-on-one conversations with parents and each of my children, there will be a teacher that someone else thinks is great, but that teacher didn't work well with my child because they're different personalities. So I don't necessarily agree with the highly effective teacher in Alpine. They're using a computer algorithm to determine what is a highly effective teacher. I think that any parent on the block can tell you which teacher is highly effective with her children. I also don't necessarily agree. I mean, I think we all agree that testing children and assessing children is necessary and that a teacher should be able to assess her students. But I don't agree with the notion, like when I opted my children out of some of the testing last year, one of the state board members wrote back and said, well, I just feel so bad because how is the teacher going to ever know where your child is? And I just think that that's a little offensive to a teacher because I know that each one of my children's teachers knew exactly where my children were. It may be nice occasionally to be able to compare some data, but I think that we're overemphasizing that aspect.
Okay. So certainly a theme that I think probably we're going to take away from this meeting is concern about data gathering, data dissemination, data access. So this question is, and there's been several questions, similar questions. What information is the state keeping on the educational database?
me start with that?
Yeah, go ahead.
Okay. The districts send, I may get some of these wrong, but the districts all send the following information to the State Office of Education. So you have the unique student identifier, you have the student name, the student birth date, the course, the teacher, the school, whether they have an IEP or not, and demographic information. There may be a couple of other things. All of that information goes to the state. The state longitudinal database grant that we talked about earlier requires all of that information every year followed all the way along. We also send information because the teachers need to be tracked in that database as well, so that the database maintains the teacher information, and you can and you could query the database and see this teacher, her kids' scores, and everything else. The important thing to note here is that we're talking actually about two databases when we're talking about SAGE testing. So the state has a database for its information. The state then takes the information that it has on my student and uploads it into the database for our testing vendor, American Institutes for Research. They have their own sets of servers that they maintain. All of the programs that we access to test our kids in our school districts are run from that, that set of servers. So as my kid logs in to that testing portal, all of that information is linked up on the servers at American Institutes for Research. And this is where the data privacy issues get a little bit hairy, because we have a contract with American Institutes for Research. In that contract, which I have read, there is nothing that prohibits them on how they use that data. Because of parent concerns, the State Board of Education signed an addendum with American Institutes for Research that says that American Institutes for Research, or AIR, will not share that data with a third party without the consent of the Utah State Office of Education, not without my consent. Okay? But the other piece that you need to understand is American Institutes, plural, for research comprises between 20 and 30 subsidiary organizations. And so, according to our contract, and that's all I can go off of, my child's individual data, when I register them for school, at my local school, gets uploaded to the State Office of Education, who then sends my child's data to American Institutes for Research. All because I registered my kid with a birth certificate. American Institutes for Research can then use all of that information however they choose, as long as they don't share it without the state office's consent, including with those 20 to 30 subsidiary organizations. That is the concern that parents have. There is nothing legally prohibiting any of that, and that's the concern. Then you add in these formative and interim tests, all done on the exact same set of servers. They may be able to give wonderful information to teachers. The problem is we don't know who else is going to have access to that information. And what you're asking me to do is, as a parent, to just trust people who I do not know, in states I do not know, in organizations that I do not know, that they will always, for now and forevermore, be able to be in control of my child's data and use it for good and use it for the reasons that I would want as a parent. And that is the concern.
Dave.
I've also read the contract. I guess I read it through different eyes, being an attorney, and I guess I don't reach the same conclusion.
I'm a data person, so I'm probably...
AIR cannot share that data. That data is owned by the state of Utah. They are prohibited from sharing it with any of their subsidiaries. They can only use it per the contract, and that's all they can do. Certainly, there's lots of conspiracy theories about AIR, but the reality with AIR is they have a number of different subsidiaries, and the one we contracted with, the division we contracted with, is simply the testing. And I have not seen anything, and I don't think any other member of the state board or the superintendency has seen anything from AIR where they've released any data to anyone other than the state itself as part of their testing contract. Certainly, we can think of scenarios in which any kind of data breach can happen. We're trying not to have those data breaches. In fact, the State Board, we're doing a performance audit of our IT to try to see if we can find out if there are any holes in our potential data security. So that is a concern for the State Board. But I don't believe that through that contract with AIR that that's an issue.
Okay, so
It's not sharing, it's access. That American Institutes for Research has access to it. They don't have to share it, but they can use it themselves within their organization any way that they see fit. As long as it stays there. That's the way that I read it. I hope you're right, Dave. I so hope you're right.
okay, Elisa.
Sorry, I apologize, but I just think that it's important. I don't believe that this is a conspiracy theory because it's documented, but according to Utah law, it calls for behavioral indicators to be on the test. And so that's a big concern with parents because what are behavioral indicators? And it's on SB 15. It's in the law. And then there are many. There are many parents. Well, it hasn't been answered effectively. But I'd love to hear your answer. There's many reports of subjective questions on the test that could be answered in multiple ways, and then when you combine AIR's stated, what do they call themselves? Their mission is a behavioral.
Their full title is American Institutes for Research in the Behavioral Sciences.
Yeah, and so it's just too many things at the same time, and parents have some concern about that because who gets to determine what is correct behavior?
Okay. So we're coming down the home stretch here, so we're down to our last couple of questions. If our family chooses to opt out of SAGE core testing, how will that affect our teachers, our kids in future years, and the way our family is looked at in Weber County? Let's start with Sharon.
We had 140 approximately students opt out, well, parents opt out on students' behalf, out of, probably 30,000 that were tested. And by law, a teacher, administrator, district office, you don't look at that child any differently, that family any differently. In all the conversations I've had with the parents, I've said, you know what's right for your child. You make this decision. It will never come into play with how we view a child. That child is there for us to educate, and that doesn't even play into this decision. So no repercussions would ever come to that child or the teacher. As a matter of fact, they've taken care of things so that that child is counted appropriately at the state level when accountability measures are done. So there are no repercussions if the parent decides to opt out. But again, the conversations I've had with the parents, you rob us of another data point, another piece of information about your child that could be helpful to making sure that your child has access to all of the opportunities and the extra help that they may need.
Superintendent.
Well, that's all I was going to say. I mean, we certainly respect the parents' right to opt out. We never object to that. But like I said, just maybe emphasize the last point that Sherry made. You want to be cautious that you're not handicapping your teacher in knowing some things about your student that would allow the teacher to make adjustments in instruction on a day-to-day basis to better meet the needs of your child. I understand the concerns of security breaches, especially in the climate that we're in as a nation. And all of that kind of comes back to an assumption of a testing and accountability model. And I can't, I'm not going to beat a dead horse again on that, but that's where it comes down. But they want me to. But again, you don't want to handicap a teacher by not giving them the information that they need to better meet the needs of your student. I'm talking more the informative data, not so much the end of course data.
Okay. All right. So I'm going to ask the most unfair question of the night. It's not so much the content of the question, but just the limitation that I'm going to place on, and it's a time limitation. So I want to hear your elevator speech. If you could, and maybe we go back to the superintendent, has talked about how we were using the wrong model. So my question is, what is the right model? If you were in charge and you could implement the policy, give me your elevator speech for what that would be. And let's start there with Dave, and then we'll go all the way to the end. I know it's an unfair question because there's so many issues, but do your best.
I mean, my elevator speech, I guess what my goal would be is to have kids when they exit the secondary school system truly be college and career ready, that they can fulfill their dreams, whatever they be, that there's nothing holding them back, that they come out with an education, well-rounded individuals who can contribute to our society, who can be great citizens, who can be part of our great experiment in America as it is, be part of our capitalistic system, be able to make a good living, be able to have a standard of living and a standard of life that they can truly be anything they want to be. I mean, that's my goal. That's what I'd like them to be. That's what I'd like them to have when they leave our school system.
As I said before, I've seen a lot of standards come and go in 27 years, and although these are not perfect, I still believe they're the best we've seen, and they're the way we should teach children. Do they need maybe some minor tweaks? Absolutely. And we're in the process of doing that, as a matter of fact, with the math standards, which is steering committee looking at those to evaluate, maybe some realignment of curriculum and so forth. But I wholeheartedly believe, again, these are the best we've seen in many, many years. I think it's what's right for children. And bottom line, that's my concern. Everything I do, either on the curriculum side or the assessment side, is always run through the sieve of what's right for children and what's going to help take them to the level that they will be, successful in college and careers and be able to do what they want to do. So it's all about the kids, and as long as we remember that that's the bottom line, I think we're going to make the right decisions.
I have to agree with what Dave said about my goal for how a child leaves school is prepared for human greatness.